Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Eddie Liger Power Hour. It's been a minute. I feel like at least it definitely has been a minute, at least since I've been here solo talking to you all on the Power Hour show. I've been focusing heavily on getting the ACP off the ground recently, not just as a member of the Central Committee of the American Communist Party, but also helping to get my own club off the ground here in Dubuque. Oops, I just kind of doxed myself here in Iowa. Maybe I'll delete that, but I don't really care. I've doxed myself, given the general area that I live in, a million times. But getting that off the ground, and one of the things I like about the party structure so far is that executive board members like myself, or Politburo members, which is the second highest body in the party, um, they are allowed to participate in their clubs and be part of their clubs, but they can't accept leadership positions, so that we don't have certain clubs getting biased by the executive board, and we just remain true to democratic centralism, and it prevents too much power and an unnecessary amount of power from concentrating in the hands of the executive board and the Politburo. But that's neither here nor there. I've been busy with that, and then I spent all day writing today, working on a paper I'm doing, which is a Marxist analysis of the gold standard and of the development of currency throughout the history of capitalism and capitalism's development, and basically how capitalism elevates gold to the level of currency, and then gold is subsumed by paper money, and paper banknotes become the main form of currency, means of payment, and means of circulation. Gold is then the basis of paper money. Paper money is weighted based on gold, and this is what we call the gold standard. And then eventually in the 1970s, we make the full transition to fiat money, and gold is abandoned as a basis of money. So I've been writing a lot about that. It's 21 pages so far. I'm really excited about it. We'll probably publish it in the first Party Theoretical Journal. But anyways, I wanted to talk about currency and some things related to the gold standard on the stream today, since that's been the focus of my research all day and recently. Also, probably going to be competing in wrestling in a month, a little less than a month actually, on the 14th and 15th for the World Team Trials, trying to make a world team and go compete against people overseas at the World Championships in Albania. So I'll be very busy in the next 4 weeks training because that competition is going to be my priority, because if you're competing at this level and you don't make it your priority, you're making a mistake, because you're going to get rocked against people who are making training their priority. But anyways, I should still be around fulfilling my duties with the ACP and hopping in on whatever live streams I can. But basically, I'll be training twice a day, every day for the next 4 weeks, and that'll take up the majority of my time. Other than that, plan to talk about the gold standard and currency, like I said today, as well as the development of capitalism. And then if we have time, which I'm hoping we do, if we have time and if I have energy, at least, I'm hoping to do one of these communist tier lists. I think this is stupid. People know I'm a fan of the philosopher Hans-Georg Muller, who's based in China, a German philosopher, developed a theory of wokeism that we really like. And he's also developed a theory about listicles, meaning like Watch Mojo videos, these videos that rank everything into tier lists, or rank everything into top tens. And he said it's not a good way to see the world. You shouldn't rank everything, into a numbered list. It's just not the best way to view the world. And he said that these lists don't provide the payoff that they promise with their titles. Anyways, don't mean to get too philosophical on you here and ruin the fun with the tier list. So I disagree with the concept of tier list. That being said, I also think they're kind of fun, and I want to do one, and it'll give me a chance to talk about all of these communist or not so communist leaders. So that'll be fun. Welcome to everyone in the chat. I see Slava's here. Jason Weidman's here. What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy? It says peak content. You're damn right it is. Got to get these people up to speed and educated. First time catching a live, says Ashura. Thank you, Ashura. Thanks for being here. Glad you were able to stop in and catch the live. We're happy to have you here. Greetings, fellow petrodollar appreciators, says Dryerlint. I don't know if I'm a petrodollar appreciator, but I'm definitely down to talk about the petrodollar. The Wanderer says, is gold of any use to the communists? Good question. We will jump into all of these questions and more related to the gold standard. Think of the best questions, comments, and topics related to the, or subtopics related to the gold standard and currency under capitalism that you want to bring up, and we will discuss it after the international. All right, I already see some interesting comment being dropped in the chat here. We're going to have a lot to talk about today. Henry Gustav says, the petrodollar is just an agreement to price oil in dollars, nothing more. Yes, it is. And through my research today, I found it was actually never a formal agreement, right? There was never any written agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia or other Middle Eastern countries that said you will only price your oil in the US dollar in exchange for US military protection and generous deals from the US financial system. It was more of an informal agreement. There were agreements that were signed in 1974 about oil cooperation between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, which basically, we can all infer what that cooperation was, primarily trading all of their oil in the U.S. dollar. And in that deal, also military cooperation in exchange for economic cooperation. So they never said explicitly that they were forming the petrodollar deal. There's no agreement signed between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia called the petrodollar deal, and bourgeois economists will even use this to argue that the petrodollar doesn't exist at all, fallaciously, because of course something doesn't have to exist de jure for it to exist de facto. There doesn't have to be a written petrodollar agreement for a petrodollar to exist or function. But yeah, there was never an explicit agreement. And as someone said, those agreements expired about a month or so, and people made a very big deal about this, which is true, acting like, the petrodollar is falling. And in a broad sense, that is true. More and more oil is being traded with the Chinese yuan. More and more China is trading more and more of their own crude that they produce in their own currency, pricing it in the yuan. So we know with the rise of multipolarity, there is a transition away from the U.S. dollar and the petrodollar and U.S. dollar hegemony. But we shouldn't exaggerate it, right? It's not going to be this overnight leap. It's not like those agreements expire and all of a sudden the petrodollar goes away. The Saudi Arabian rial, their currency, is still tied to the U.S. dollar. The vast majority of oil exchanges still happen with US dollars. And actually, people might not think of this because of how much the US has been deindustrialized and how financialized our economy has become. But the US is still the world's top oil producer, right ahead of Saudi Arabia. So It's not like the petrodollar is going to decline tomorrow. It's going to be something that happens in gradually and then in spurts. But yeah, we're definitely seeing a decline of it. And it's interesting. There was, and this is one of the things I've been finding through my research, and the idea for this gold standard paper I'm writing came from reading Marx's Capital Volume 3, where he's engaging with the British currency school. And the currency school was a group of British bourgeois economists who said that the gold standard was very important, that if the currency supply was based in gold or rooted in gold, or if banks were forced to not loan out more paper money than what they had in their gold reserves, then that would prevent economic crises. Now, Marx said this is not the case, and it's been proven by history time and time again that, having a gold standard doesn't prevent economic crises. Capitalism will still crash. And in fact, having a gold standard can make it worse sometimes, because the government has less, and banking institutions have less flexibility in how they respond to the crisis and try and get the economy to recover. So they were wrong that gold prevents capitalist crises. Banks are always going to irresponsibly loan out money, and inevitably, eventually, the people they loan that money out to, whether they be consumers or capitalists, won't be able to pay back their loans with interest, and the whole system will come crashing down because it's built on a house of cards. That's how finance works in general, or capitalist finance works in general, whether you force the banks to keep gold reserves or not. But what the currency school also argued was that the power of a country's currency, of their national sovereign currency, is determined by the amount of gold that they have in reserve, by the amount of gold that they have hoarded in the vaults of their banking institutions or their state central bank. And Marx said this is incorrect. The value of a currency is based off of the amount of socially necessary labor that it's worth, or the amount of labor that it can be exchanged for in the market. So the country that has the most developed productive forces, the country that has the most advanced industry and can price the most goods in their own dollar, in their own currency, and the country that has their currency in circulation the most, therefore, will have the most powerful and the most valuable currency. Because if you're in an underdeveloped economy, the money there can purchase much less than in, say, the British economy in the 1800s, where the Industrial Revolution had taken off and there was all this commodity production going on. A British pound would have been much more valuable than money in, I don't know, Mozambique or something. So it was the more advanced your productive forces were, the more valuable your currency was. But with the concentration and accumulation of capital that we've seen throughout capitalism's development, and with the formation of central state, or largely state-controlled financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, we've seen the U.S. do things like say, hey, Middle Eastern countries, trade all of your oil in the U.S. dollar. And if you don't price all of your oil in the U.S. dollar and sell it all in the U.S. dollar, and force other countries and other firms to use U.S. dollars to purchase oil, which is the most valuable commodity on earth. Over 90% of industries today are reliant on oil for transportation and machinery and electricity and etc. The U.S. can use their political power and their military might to say, you have to trade all of your oil in the U.S. dollar, or we're going to do what we did to Iraq, or we're going to do what we did to Libya. So this gives even if, the U.S. doesn't have the most advanced manufacturing base, and China does have more manufacturing and industrial output than us at this point, we're still able to keep the U.S. dollar as the top dog, because even oil that isn't produced here in the U.S. by our productive forces and our laborers are being traded in the U.S. dollar. So U.S. dollar, so the power of the U.S. dollar is over and above the power of the U.S. productive forces, or the advancement of the productive forces. But this isn't necessarily, disproving Marx's theory of currency. It shows that Marx's currency was correct. It just evolves with time. It evolves as capital concentrates, and the economy moves towards more central economic planning, which is the way that the capitalist economy has been evolving. As capital concentrates into fewer and fewer hands, you have the formation of institutions like this, like central banks or like the Fed. These institutions that can plan the economy, these centralized authorities, oftentimes state authorities, that basically plan the economy, and they still plan it on a capitalist basis, right? I wouldn't say that we're living in socialism, although, that can be an interesting way to put it, or a good explanatory tool, a way to think about it, because capitalism is transitioning to socialism, whether the capitalists like it or not. But as capitalism develops, there is increased central planning, and this allows, say, the U.S. empire, which is has the most dominant centralized state authorities, as well as global financial authorities like the IMF and World Bank that emerged after World War II. They're able to use these institutions in a concerted and planned way in order to maximize their own profits and to benefit their own economic interests. So the changes that we see in how capitalism works, which are, make it function differently from the kind of capitalism that Marx was looking at, oftentimes come from this dialectical transformation of free competition, which is one of the core principles of capitalism, into monopoly, which is what Lenin talks a lot about in Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, when he's talking about this evolution of capital. And it's evolved even since his day to have more concentration and to have more centralized state or state-associated authorities like the IMF and the World Bank, who make a concerted effort to plan the economy, centrally plan the economy, but they do it on a capitalist basis. And they create the conditions for the possibility of socialism. Capitalism has created the conditions where all the workers have to do is have a political revolution, seize control of these state authorities, and use them to plan the economy in a way that benefits us rather than in a way that maximizes profit. And it's interesting, I'll get to the super chats and some of the questions after this, but it's interesting how throughout it's the rise of capitalism and the advancement of technology and the advancement of the productive forces, which allow for more commodity production and more commerce, that causes capitalism to come about, and it creates the increased commerce creates the need for a universal equivalent, aka money. It creates the need for currency as a mediator of exchange, as a mediator of circulation, as a way, as a good, a universal equivalent that can be exchanged with any other good. Because you have all these commodities on the market, it no longer makes sense to just barter, right? To just trade commodities with each other. You need a currency. You need a universal equivalent that everybody in the society values and recognizes can be used to purchase commodities. So capitalism, or maybe if not capitalism, it is capitalism. It's capitalism emerging, but the early stages of capitalism and industrial and commercial development create the need for a universal equivalent. I guess I'll say commercial development and the rise of class society and the increase of production creates the need for a universal equivalent. And then with the rise of capitalism, as the economy starts to become more globalized and various societies are trading with each other rather than just trading within the society or within their own society, you have the need for a universal equivalent that everybody recognizes, a form of money that people recognize across societies and cultures, so you can have cross-cultural trade or international trade. So this is where you see the onset of metal money. So capitalism elevates gold to the position of currency. It says, everybody has these precious metals like gold and silver. Gold and silver had traditionally been used had been viewed as luxury goods. They were associated with wealth. And, certain countries were already using these gold and silver coins as money, which was something that they developed through practice. So eventually, all these countries adopt metallic currency as their basis. Or as the currency. But then with the onset of the financial system And as capitalism creates this credit system and the big banks begin to grow, they make their profits by loaning people money, right? They loan a capitalist money. The capitalist uses that money to purchase machinery and labor. The machinery and labor produces commodities which he sells for a profit, and then he gives some of his profit to the banker who loaned him money to pay him back for the loan, plus a little extra for interest. And that's how the banks make their profit. So if they are limited to loaning out the money that they have in gold, the metallic money that they have, it limits how much profit they can make. And of course, we know that capitalists always need to maximize their profit. So capitalism creates the incentive for the credit system to start printing paper money and loaning more paper money than what they have in their gold reserves. And that's exactly what they start doing. These individual capitalist banks just start printing money and giving it to people. And of course, this causes economic crises when eventually the capitalists can't pay back the money with interest. Or, you also have consumer banks, like this was the 2008 housing market crash. They gave all these loans to people for housing, and then eventually, when people didn't have enough money to pay those loans back with interest, the whole financial system came crashing down. So this kept happening. And eventually people started saying we should have central banks who are the only ones that are allowed to print currency. So then that's what they end up doing. You have the formation of central banks. So you no longer have individual banks printing paper currency. And then you have these people like the currency school in Britain who say, okay, we can have paper banknotes. We can have paper money if it's not, if it's being printed by a central bank, but that it still needs to be tied to gold. Those central banks need to have gold in their gold reserves. So that becomes the idea. So capitalism elevates gold to the role of currency, the role of the universal equivalent and the mediator of circulation and exchange. But then through its development and through the development of the credit system, gold is subsumed by paper money. Paper banknotes, bills of exchange, and promissory notes, which are the forms of paper money or paper value that are being loaned out by these banking institutions, are the main form of currency. They're the main form of currency in circulation that's actually acting as the mediator of exchange. But the banks are supposed to keep these vast sums of gold in their reserves that are equal to the amount of banknotes that they're giving out. Hypothetically, people are supposed to go to the bank and say, hey, exchange my banknotes for gold. And the bank gives them a certain amount of gold. But of course, the banks weren't doing that. The banks were just trying to maximize their profit. So they would always loan out more money than what they had in gold. And it would always lead to a financial or what you call a monetary crisis. So eventually, the gold standard is abandoned because countries want more flexibility. During World War I, the gold standard is abandoned a bunch or suspended a bunch so that countries can print off money and buy more weapons of war. And in the 30s, the US and Britain first, and then the US basically do away with the gold standard completely. They get together after World War II and they form the Bretton Woods system where they say currency will be tied to the US dollar. And then eventually, of course, the U.S. kicks the gold standard completely in the 70s, and then that's when we have the onset or the formation of the petrodollar. But capitalism elevates gold to the level of currency, and then it kicks it to the side and replaces it with fiat currency, which is an abstract token representation of value. In the Marxist sense, money is supposed to be a commodity. Right? It's supposed to be something like gold, but what fiat money is, which is digital or paper money, it's just a token, a representation. And what is it a representation of? It's a representation of all of the socially necessary labor in society, which is what creates all of the commodities on the market in society. Money that we have today is just a token representation of that. It's not a commodity itself like gold. So it's an evolution, and I think it's an evolution towards socialism. We see increased centralized economic planning. We see the evolution of money from a commodity itself to just an abstract representation of labor value, which is like the purest form of money. And it creates the conditions for the possibility of socialism. Yeah, it creates the conditions for us to seize power of the economy as workers and do a Project Cybersyn and plan the whole thing for ourselves instead of for Wall Street and the big banks. Okay. So that's basically the gist of my my paper on the gold standard. Obviously, it goes way more in depth, but El Jimenez says, "What is the petrodollar?" So I think we've already gotten into this, but like I said, the currency school in Britain said that the value of a currency is based on how much gold a country has, and Marx says no. It's based on that currency's ability to make purchases, or it's based on that currency's purchasing power. So the petrodollar basically makes it so that all countries, not just the US, but all countries, when they're buying oil from Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, which is the second biggest oil producing country behind the US, all countries have to purchase that oil in the US dollar. And of course, in the modern economy, oil is the most powerful commodity. Every single economic institution pretty much in the world needs oil for transportation and running their machines. So this makes the US dollar way more valuable. This political agreement between the Saudis and the Americans for the Saudis to price their oil in the US dollar in exchange for military protection from the US, it greatly increases the value and the power of the US dollar on the global stage, which gives the US economic outsized economic power in various different ways, whether it comes to the ability to print money, or the ability to isolate economies from the broader global economy, like Venezuela or the DPRK or Iran, all these countries they're trying to destroy. So that's the petrodollar basically. Is it okay to go back to gold even though I might come from stolen land like Africa? I don't think going back to gold solves anything. I think that's a return to the ideas of the currency school from the 1800s that have already been disproven. And I know there are people who are selling gold, right? So they're marketing like, oh, as soon as we left the gold standard, that's when everything in this country went downhill. In reality, that's just when the unions were crushed, right? That's when the social safety net in the US was dismantled. And we started moving towards neoliberalism with Ronald Reagan in the 80s. And the gold standard was abandoned in the 70s. So sometimes people falsely just blame everything on the abandonment of the gold standard. But I think under socialism, having fiat currency makes more sense. Having a currency that's a token that represents labor value, I think that's a more socialistic form of money, whereas having like having gold coins as the currency is more of like a capitalistic form of money. So that's also what I mean by the evolution of currency, even or the development of capitalism, but also the development of currency itself, creating the conditions for the possibility of socialism. So I don't think going back to gold solves anything for anyone. I didn't know. I was curious. I had heard a lot about the gold standard recently. But after doing this research, I'm pretty confident in saying that. Gold standard was plagued with constant economic depressions. Yes. It did not stop crises like the currency school theorized. The Federal Reserve is an agent of the U.S. federal government. The government doesn't borrow anything, nor are the taxes collected to pay back any so-called borrowed money. Yeah, and people, struggle to understand the debt. What is the debt? Who do we owe the debt to? Do we owe the debt to ourselves? And this is kind of where modern monetary theory is coming from, where like the debt doesn't even really matter. And the US can basically, in a lot of ways, just print as much currency as they want because of the petrodollar and because of US dollar dominance and because of the move towards fiat currency. The fact that currency doesn't have to be rooted in anything anymore. And this raises the question of, well, is money detached? Has money become detached from value then? Has it even become detached from labor value? Which is a interesting question and a possibility that Marx raises in Volume 3 when he's talking about the development of the credit system. It's a possibility for money to become detached from value and just be printed endlessly. I've joined the ACP. Keep up the good work. Can't wait for the Congress. Hell yeah, I'm really excited for our Congress in it's October. Sorry, I thought we were planning on September maybe, and then we moved it to October. But yeah, I'm super excited for the Congress. It's going to be super the last event that we did, the Free America to Free Palestine event, or the last big event, I should say. We do a lot of smaller events, but the last big event we did was more just for fun. Get everyone together, meet the Midwestern Marx community, meet the infrared community, announce publicly that Jackson, Haas, Carlos, and I, Noah, the whole crew, we're going to be working together. But this next one is going to be like, we have a lot of business to do, right? We have a lot of things that need to be voted on. We have a lot of things that need to be discussed by party leadership and the rank and file, or between the two. So it should be a very fun and very productive weekend. Thank you so much for the super chat. Super chats are how we fund this institute. We're entirely people's funded. Unlike Candace Owens and Jordan Peterson and whoever the heck else, Ben Shapiro, we do not have multimillionaires funding us. We do not have giant libertarian think tanks and institutions paying us to do these shows and push the same old boring talking points. All of our funding comes from you, the viewer, and we appreciate you for it. Did the U.S.-Israeli policy change after the drop of the gold standard? Not really. The U.S. had already become the main benefactor of Israel by that point, and Zionist organizations had already deeply influenced and impacted the American population and their views on Israel and their views on Zionism, and got them to connect support for Israel to the Holocaust. And U.S. politicians were already bankrolling Israel while Britain had taken a back seat. So I don't think it changed too much. Sorry, I have notifications on here. I'm going to turn them off so I can focus. Modern monetary theory plus socialism. Yeah, that's the thing too, is like once you detach from the gold standard, like the reason they do that is to give them increased flexibility in the ability to print money and pay for things that they need, which is how they respond to crises. Like in 2008, when they bailed out the big banks, tons of money was printed by the Fed in order to do that. So they wouldn't have been able to do that if the gold standard was still in place. They probably would have just suspended it. But hypothetically, if they followed the gold standard, the big banks would have just went under, and every institution, every firm that they were financing and propping up, because, under our current planned system of capitalism, basically every industry is propped up by the big banks. A lot of them aren't even making actual profits anymore. They're just having, or they're making very small profits. They're just having money funneled into them by the large banking institutions, but or by the government itself, or the government banking institutions. But where was I going with that? Oh, it would have caused a disaster, right? The 2008 financial crisis was a disaster, but it would have been even worse for people and for the economy as a whole, and the recovery would have taken much longer if there was still a gold standard. So what was I saying? That's like the libertarian solution to the 2008 crisis. Just let it all crash. Just don't do anything. Let everyone die. But yeah, sorry. What I was saying was, under socialism, it gives the abandonment of the gold standard would hypothetically give us increased economic flexibility, more flexibility to fund development projects and things like that. So I think MMT is important to understand. Unfortunately, government does borrow from Fed and pay interest on debt, even though it is unnecessary because of the Federal Reserve Act. We borrow our own currency. Thank you, General Milley, for the $5 super chat. Let me read that again, though. Unfortunately, the government does borrow from the Fed and pay interest back on the debt, even though this is unnecessary because of the Federal Reserve Act. We borrow our own currency, yes, and pay it back with interest, which is quite insane. But it just shows how irrational our economy has gotten, how backwards the whole economic system has to function in order to keep profits at their certain level, or in order to keep the system moving forward. Absolutely wild. But thank you, General Millie, for the $5 super chat. Money isn't a commodity, nor does it need to be. No, yeah, that's the point I'm getting at with the fiat currency. Money becomes a token. It's not actually a commodity. And that actually kind of makes more sense because money doesn't need to be a commodity. All it is a means of payment, a means of circulation, a way to mediate exchange, and a representation of labor value, the labor that's used to create the commodities around us. And this is a development that goes all the way back to ancient times when they were bartering, right? Like if I am an axe maker and I'm trading with a bowl maker, and the time that it takes me to make one axe, or in the time it takes me to make one axe, he can make 4 bowls. I'm going to want to trade one axe for 4 bowls because it's an equivalent amount of labor time. And eventually money is created as a representation of this labor time. And eventually money becomes detached from commodity and is just a token representation of labor time. But under our current system, I still go back and forth on whether money is detached from actual labor value or not, because Paul Cockshott traced the amount of labor time in every industry and correlated it by like a 94% correlation to prices. So like labor time is still ultimately what's determining prices in the productive industries. But at the same time, if the Fed can just print out endless money and use it for whatever they want, does that show that money and currency is completely detached from labor value? I don't know. Question. Good question. Needs to be raised. That's why I'm writing this article, though, because like American Marxism has been so filled with CIA, Congress for Cultural Freedom bullshit for the last 70 years, American and European Marxism, that a lot of these like vital, important, concrete questions that take tons and tons of research to like unpack and understand and answer have not been touched by Western Marxists. They're too busy talking about how, the Soviet Union was bad because Orthodox Marxism was dogmatic, and the Soviets and the Bolsheviks didn't focus enough on gender issues and issues of identity, and maybe the proletariat isn't the revolutionary agent, and instead we should just fight for cultural and sexual liberation. This is the kind of stuff that CIA-backed Western Marxists have been talking about for the last 70 years. So they haven't updated the Marxist analysis of a lot of the most important questions. And what I'm trying to do with this paper is not answer all of these questions, not to say here's the definitive answer on this stuff, but to open the door to say, okay, here's what I figured out. Here's the conclusions I came to from studying the works of Karl Marx, and then doing tons of research to try and update his analysis for the current day, and trace the development of currency from Marx's time to the current day, and look at the implications of that for the broader capitalist economy, and how the evolution of the broader capitalist economy came to bring those things about. Right? I want to ask those questions and give my conclusions to those questions so that other people can look at them, and other people can get up to date with the research I've done and say, oh, here's what I found. Here's some research I did that you overlooked. Here's this question that you didn't answer in your paper, but that I'm going to try and answer now. But your paper made me think of it, so I'm going to try and answer. Right? That's traditionally how the Marxist tradition has worked. That's how Marxist thinking has worked. It's been this collective process of coming to understand the world and sharing and debating ideas with like-minded people who also have the philosophical outlook that helps them understand the world and modes of production. And that's been lost in the US and Europe because all of our communist parties over the last 3 decades have been liberals. So here we are. But that's why I'm writing this paper, and that's why I'm publishing it with the American Communist Party's theoretical journal. Because I want, other members of the American Communist Party to read this and expand upon it. I want, the American Communist Party to be putting forward the most advanced theory. As Lenin said, we need to have the most advanced theoretical outlook. And I want us to be putting out the most advanced theory that's specific to America. Like, yeah, we're not going to be putting out more advanced theory than the Communist Party of China right now. They have 100 million members and a bunch of and the smartest people in China are intellectuals for the party. Whereas here, the smartest people are, working for BlackRock and Vanguard as engineers or whatever here in the U.S. So, whereas, genius Marxist intellectuals like Carlos are actually attacked by the academy rather than praised by the academy. So China's got a huge advantage. But we want to be putting out groundbreaking Marxist theory for the English language and for the U.S. and theory that's specific to the U.S., that gives Marxist theory a national form, that uses Marxist theory to analyze the Civil War and the Revolutionary War and American historical figures and American events, because that's been so overlooked for so long, even by thinkers in the American philosophical tradition or the European philosophical tradition, West European philosophical tradition, who consider themselves to be Marxists because they've been too busy talking about gender, or Foucault's been too busy thinking about what societies were you allowed to hook up with people who were younger than 18, and what does that say today? Will I be able to hook up with middle schoolers under socialism? No, Foucault, shut the hell up. Do an analysis of currency or something. Why are you talking about this? What's the significance of Venezuela joining BRICS? It would just accelerate the rise of multipolarity. It makes perfect sense. Venezuela has always been a part of the multipolar world. The Bolivarian Revolution has always been a thorn of the side of the U.S. That's why since 1998, the U.S. has not stopped trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government, because they go against what the U.S. is doing. So if they were to enter into BRICS, this trade agreement with the multipolar world, it would only strengthen what they're doing to challenge the U.S. And of course, BRICS is also challenging dollar hegemony, right? They're doing a lot of their trading not in the U.S. dollar. Like I said, it's going to take a long time because the U.S. dollar and the petrodollar are so deeply entrenched, and they've been around for so long, and they're so powerful. They're so good at doing the petrodollar is good at doing what it's intended to do, and the U.S. empire is good at propping itself up at this point. But the multipolar world is rising, and then there's nothing the U.S. can do about it. No empire lasts forever, and Venezuela joining BRICS only increases the amount of trade and development deals that they're going to be doing with China and with Chinese banks and with Chinese companies and the Chinese state, which means the IMF and the World Bank and the U.S. and their banks and industrialists get left out more and more. And that's what's going on with BRICS, and it's a slow burn. Right? China's not over there saying, soon capitalism will collapse and BRICS will bring about the multipolar world and China and Russia will be the new superpowers. You rah rah. That's not what they're saying. They're just saying, we're just chilling, man. We're just developing and trading, and financing development. Let us chill. But the longer they do that, the longer they develop trade and finance development and build agreements with countries around the world, the more U.S. unipolar hegemony collapses and U.S. Economic and geopolitical dominance starts to go away. And the more that happens, the more desperate and decrepit and war bloodthirsty and nuclear thirsty the U.S. ruling class gets as they attempt to keep themselves propped up as the dominant unipolar hegemon. Good question. I see some good conversations going on about the Fed and currency in the comments, but I can't keep up with them. I'm sorry. Not while talking at the same time. Too complex of a subject. Let me know if you got simple questions. All right, I'm gonna run to the bathroom quick, and then let's do our commie tier list. I'll pull up something for you guys to watch during the intermission. What do you guys want to watch? Huh? Here we go. Let's go. Oh, I just closed out of it on accident. Oh, never mind. I minimized it. All right, enjoy. Here's me wrestling at the World Team Trials or something. Did I win? Go me. All these MMT people getting psyoped on the Fed. I don't know. I'm probably going to have to look into MMT as a part of my paper, aren't they? Or look into it more than I have. Always more to learn. All right, people, let's do this. The communist leader tier list. Let me see if I can do full screen here, actually. I looked through a couple of the tier lists. This was the best one I found. It's hard because they, it's hard to find one that's good. Actually, I want to zoom in a bit. It's hard to find one that's good and that has, leaders that you actually know. This one had a few people. I had no idea who they were, but I thought this was the best out of all of them. It's on tiermaker.org or whatever, who has about 1,000 communist leader tier lists. But the first one we got here, I have no idea who this is. Peter Martins. Does anyone know who Peter Martins is? Someone tell me in the comments if you do. I have no idea, but I'm just going to skip him for now because I have no clue. Next up, we have Gromsky, the writer of the Prison Notebooks, the person who analyzed hegemony, one of the first people to ask, or not one of the first people, I guess, but one of the first people to expand on the role of the media and on the role of control of cultural institutions that the capitalist class can use to suppress the rise of socialism. I guess Gromsky was obviously in prison the whole time he was writing, but he did about as good as he could for being stuck in a jail cell the whole time, locked up by Italian fascists. So we're gonna go with very good. Good job. All right, Willie Colon. This guy's a musician, I guess, like a jazz musician or something. I have no idea. I'm just gonna skip him. Bakunin. What did Marx say about Bakunin? Let's look it up. We need this quote. It's worth it. Marx in 1963 in a letter to Engels. Bakunin has become a monster, a huge mass of flesh and fat, and is barely capable of walking anymore. That doesn't say much about his theory, but his theory wasn't much better. Yes. Was Bakunin the one who? Yeah, Marx knew Bakunin. He hung out with Marx and Proudhon when Marx was younger in France. He was always, an anarchist while Marx was a Marxist. So we're going to go actually cringe on Bakunin. He's not like a literal poop brain, but he's pretty cringe. Bordiga? I've never actually read Bordiga, but just based on my interaction with his followers, not good. His followers, once it was a Bordiga fan page on TikTok, and I made a video saying that China, the question of whether or not China is socialist is dialectical because they're building socialism. Or they're in the process of building communism or a communist society, and they believe they're in the early stages of socialism. And it's a dialectical process of transitioning out of capitalism. You don't just jump to capitalism overnight. And this Bordiga fan page made a video mocking me, saying, this guy doesn't understand dialectics. LOL, what a dumbass. But they didn't make a substantive argument. So I asked, I'm like, okay, what did I get wrong? How is it not correct to explain China's transition to socialism as dialectical? And they never responded, ever. They couldn't even give me half of a substantive argument. All they wanted to do was mock and deride and rack and cause problems. So I don't know shit about Bordiga, but that was cringe. All right, who do we got next? Ernst Thälmann, German communist leader, in prison, put in solitary confinement by Hitler for 11 years. The Soviets and Stalin were trying to get him out. That ended with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which is really sad. I get that the Soviet Union was trying to prevent a world war and just trying to let the capitalist countries fight it out. But it's really sad that Ernst Thälmann had to be left in solitary confinement because of that. And I wish the KGB would have just gone and got him out, parachuted in or something, did a rescue operation. But he's there for 11 years, and then he was executed by Hitler in 1944. Hitler's personally ordered that he be executed. So we're going to go good or very good. I'll just go good. Good, because unfortunately, Hitler was able to take over his country, but spending 11 years in solitary confinement sounds absolutely horrific. Deng Xiaoping, for me, Deng is based or best. I almost put Deng in best. I almost consider him to be one of the heads of Marxism, because his theory of reform and opening up was so vital for China. It was so vital for the survival of socialism after the collapse of the USSR. It's been necessary to lifting 800 million people out of poverty. It would have been impossible without reform and opening up. He had a deep understanding of Marxism, which, I've heard people like David Harvey and other Western Marxists question Deng's understanding of Marxism. And I feel like those people have never actually read his work or never actually read the debates within the Communist Party of China, because he was a revolutionary in the Chinese Revolutionary War, right? He fought alongside Mao. He was a member of the party. He served in the party under Mao. He just had different ideas on how to build socialism in China and how to better develop the Chinese productive forces. The only reason I don't have him on best, even though he's super innovative, was because really he was drawing from Lenin's new economic policy. The program that he wanted to carry out was more similar to Lenin's, and the program that Mao was carrying out was more similar to Stalin's, more of a top-down planning model. So while it was innovative, what Deng came up with, it was already there in Marxist theory. What he expanded upon was already there in Lenin, which is something that a lot of Marxists tend to overlook. They think that Deng just went crazy and did this wild thing that nobody had ever thought of before and opened up to markets. And that's where some people say, that's not real socialism, it's capitalism. But Lenin's new economic policy was very similar. It would have allowed for a lot more market exchange and for foreign investors in specific economic and financial zones that remain under the control of the party. All right, Zinoviev, Bolshevik, who was like Lenin's best buddy and eventually ended up getting taken out in the purges. I don't know that much about Zinoviev as a person or what he believed or what he did, to be honest with you, so I'm going to skip that one. James Connolly, the Irish hero and theorist, Irish Republican socialist. James Connolly is one of my personal favorites. Obviously, I have, or I guess not obviously, but I've talked about this before on the show. I have Irish heritage. One half of my family, or one side of my family, came to the U.S. from Ireland and worked on the railroads and the Transcontinental Railroad. They fled the potato famine. So big fan of James Connolly. For those who don't know his story, he was an Irish theorist and socialist and Marxist who participated in the Easter Uprising, which was when the UK was weakened by, I believe, World War One. They were off fighting that, or maybe it was some other colonial. It might have been before World War One, actually. It might have been in the earlier 1900s. But Britain was off fighting some colonial war of expansion, and the Irish forces led an uprising. It was eventually defeated, although it was surprisingly successful. And then the leaders of the uprising, like James Connolly, were executed. And he had been wounded in the battle, so he could barely walk. He couldn't even stand. He couldn't walk. So they had to tie him into a chair for his execution. They set him up in a chair and tied him to it and shot him. And this made him a martyr among the Irish people. Even Brits were amazed at the brutality of the British colonialists, that they would tie this guy to a chair and murder him when he was clearly going to bleed out anyways. So it was a huge mistake by the Brits, really helped fire up the anti-colonial struggle in Ireland. And of course, they would gain their freedom very shortly after that. It was only like a year or two after that. So we're going to put him in very good. What gives him the bump above Thalman was that Connolly, even though he died, they both obviously were killed by imperialist or capitalist forces. But Connolly, shortly after that, Ireland did overthrow they didn't become socialist, but they did overthrow the British colonizers. So he was slightly more successful in practice than Ernst Thalman. But this, like, I hate to even say that. Like, it's such a shitty thing to say. Like, Ernst Thalman's done so much more than me. He was in solitary confinement for 11 years. But all right, Kim Il-sung, one of the most effective revolutionary and military leaders of all time. During the Korean Revolution and the Korean War, actually, not during the Korean Revolution, sorry, but during the Korean War, I believe, the U.S. and the South Korean forces, occupied Korean forces, had special units which were solely tasked with hunting down Kim Il-sung and trying to kill him. Because it might have been the Japanese who did that, actually, who had the special brigades to kill Kim Il-sung during the anti-colonial struggle. I don't remember, but one of the two colonial powers had special brigades just to hunt down Kim Il-sung because he was such an effective organizer of workers and such a genius theorist. Founded the theory of Juche, which could be simplified as basically Marxism with Korean characteristics, Marxism with Korean nationalism mixed in. So extremely effective leader, successful leader. His country is still socialist today. We're going to put him at base. He goes right under the best. Is this Murray Bookchin? Yeah, this guy sucks. Murray Bookchin was an eco-anarchist. So I don't even know why the hell he's on the list. People like that shouldn't even be allowed to call themselves Marxist, because Marx would have hated them. But he was an anarchist ecologist who argued that we should all just be one with nature. Just kidding. I don't think he was one of those guys who was like anti-industry, but everything was focused on the environment rather than lifting people out of poverty and advancing the productive forces, and super, super, super anti-communist. I don't know if he was, one of these people who was publishing in journals that were Ford Foundation funded or CIA funded, but either way, he did their work for them by bashing every existing socialist country, attacking them from the ecological angle, right? Saying we should support regime change in the Soviet Union because they have industry and they're using fossil fuels and that kind of ecological imperialism, greenwashing imperialism. And he once mocked Michael Parenti for caring so much about the little children who got fed in the USSR, right? So he was deriding Parenti for saying, hey, the USSR vastly increased living standards and decreased malnutrition and increased literacy rates. He's saying, forget all that. Don't you know they're polluting the earth? Don't you know we should support the U.S. empire invading them? Or whatever. That guy sucked. Kropotkin, I don't even know much about him. I read The Conquest of Bread one time in college. I don't feel like I gained that much from it. We'll just go bad. We won't go actually cringe. Because, I mean, the conquest of bread, what's the idea? That the capitalists own all the food. They own the means of production, the means to produce the food, so we all are subservient to them. Or under feudalism, the feudal lords own the land and the means of production, so we're all subservient to them. Holy shit, what a concept. It's almost like that concept is already in Marxism, but in a way more advanced and developed form. But whatever. Go ahead and read Conquest of Bread if you want. Rosa Luxemburg was a hero. I think it makes perfect sense to put her right alongside Ernst Thälmann, since she was also killed by the Nazis in Germany. Her attacks on Lenin were lame, and I agree with Lenin, but whatever. She was a Marxist, Leninist. I don't think her book, The Accumulation of Capital, is necessarily spot on, but it's still a good contribution to Marxist theory and Marxist political economy. And what was I saying? Rosa. Oh, yeah, and people don't know this about Rosa. And we see this today with all sorts of extreme right-wingers allying with leftists. You know, leftists are often the first to join in with right-wingers and fascists and attack communists. The Social Democrats were actually the ones who gave away Rosa Luxemburg's location to the Nazis because they knew the Nazis would actually go kill her. The black shirts would actually go, was it? Yeah. They would actually go kill her and Karl Liebknecht, so they gave them her location and sold her out because the Social Democrats saw her as an enemy and as a threat. So social democracy, that's why people call it the moderate wing of fascism. The Social Democrats and the, a lot of the people who call themselves leftists today in the United States will always side with fascism against the communists. And there are tons of examples of that. Allende, it makes perfect sense again to put him here because good leader. Project Cybersyn in Chile is super cool to look into. It was like a form of central economic planning and like computer planning that they had developed in Chile and that they were going to use to help run the economy. But he was, of course, killed by Augusto Pinochet's forces in the CIA-backed coup in Chile. Allende was a doctor. He was a good dude. He was a Democrat, right? He had been beaten in 3 previous elections where the U.S. was heavily involved in blocking him from gaining power before he was able to actually win election. The reason he goes in good is because he didn't, and I would almost put him in all right. Because Fidel Castro was warning him. Fidel Castro was saying, the CIA is going to try and kill you, right? Just because you're doing socialism democratically rather than having a revolution like we did in Cuba, just because you're doing it through the ballot box doesn't mean the U.S. is actually going to respect that. They're going to try and kill you regardless if you kick out Western multinational corporations. And he was saying, look at all these right-wingers in your country. Look at all these people like Pinochet. These people are a disaster. They're going to end up being your downfall if you don't do something about them. And Allende was like, no, got to be democratic. I can't just start throwing people in jail because they're right wing and they might side with the U.S. And then they did side with the U.S. and they killed him. So sad story, tragic tale, good guy, but goes to show why Marxism-Leninism is superior to so-called democratic socialism. Almost dropped my notes. Xi Jinping. Shouldn't have to say too much about this one. I almost put him in the based category. I'll go very good because of the anti-corruption efforts and the poverty alleviation efforts that he has carried out, really sort of recalibrating the Chinese system. If reform and opening up was a tactical retreat, right, allowing in a little bit more capitalism in order to help build socialism in the long term, then the anti-corruption efforts and the advancement of the poverty alleviation efforts under Xi Jinping were a socialist advancement. They were rooting out the influence of capital and of markets on the Communist Party of China. through the anti-corruption efforts and a refocusing of the Chinese economy on social development, poverty alleviation, following the wild 90s, as they were called in China. Brezhnev was pretty based. People give him a hard time because he was in the period of the USSR before the collapse, but it was actually a pretty economically prosperous period. We'll put him in good there. Lenin goes without saying. Marxism, Leninism. Without Lenin, you can't understand capitalism today. The theory of imperialism is vital. The theory of the concentration of capital and its formation into monopolies and the dominance of finance capital is necessary for understanding the global economy. If you read Marx, you'll understand capitalism much better. But if you read Lenin, you'll really understand capitalism today and how it's evolved since Marx. And he was a successful revolutionary who led the first successful socialist revolution. Goes without saying that he's one of the best, one of the greatest men who's ever lived, a man whose life I look back at and think, like, how these people were literally like demigods sometimes, not to be dogmatic. Engels, same thing. Some people would put Engels down here. That is complete nonsense. Engels was very humble. Engels always downplayed his own role. Engels was always, talking about how Marx was more important than him. So a lot of thinkers after him have believed him and talked about how much more important Marx was. And the worst kind of Marxists have said that Marx was this sophisticated thinker and Engels was this dum-dum who didn't actually understand Marxism, and he was writing about it, but we can't actually read his works or gain anything from them because he didn't understand dialectical materialism as well as Marx. That's just because Marx wrote in a more academic way, and Engels was always trying to simplify Marx's theory so that working class people could more easily understand it. He just had a very straightforward way of writing, but without his analysis of the development of the working class in England, it would have been very hard for Marx to write Capital. Volumes 2 and 3 were written by Engels using Marx's notes after Marx died. Without Engels, there is no Marx. Period. Period, exclamation point. Ho Chi Minh, another successful revolutionary, drew upon the U.S. Constitution and America's founding documents in order to argue for socialism and independence for Vietnam. Very base stuff. Put him right there. Hoxha, right? Is that who that is? Let me check I have it written down here. Hoxha, yeah. The joke about Hoxha is that he called everybody a revisionist, right? Everyone's a revisionist, except me. But I don't know how true that is. I don't know much about Hoxha, to be honest with you, so I'm just going to skip him. Moving on to Tito. A lot of people hate Tito. Obviously, Yugoslavia had their beef with the Soviet Union because they had more of a market socialist society, but it was still a very prosperous, successful socialist society. Yugoslavia got much worse after its dissolution, or the Balkans, as they're now called. After Yugoslavia was balkanized, ripped up into pieces, and the socialist economy was dismantled, everything got worse economically and socially for people in that region. And they had their beef with the USSR, Yugoslavia, but if you read like the debates going on within the Communist Party of China, they're constantly drawing from what Yugoslavia did. They're saying, okay, here's what the USSR did, here's what Yugoslavia did, let's compare and contrast, and then take what's best from both to do what's best for us. So I think it was kind of necessary. I think it was cool that there was a market socialist experiment. Obviously, he's no Stalin, but we'll put him in very good. Marx. Don't think I have to explain that one too much. Mao. Again, top notch. Just like Lenin, successfully led a revolution, a country that still got a communist government and a country that's still socialist to this day with a dictatorship of the proletariat in power, and made theoretical contributions. He advanced the science of Marxism, adopted the worker-peasant alliance idea from Lenin, and his work on contradiction introduced this idea of primary and non-primary contradictions, or yeah, I think that's what they're called, non-primary contradictions versus primary contradictions. So that's a useful text for understanding dialectics, understanding contradiction. If you're a working class person who's not used to reading dense philosophical works, Mao wrote for illiterate peasants who were literally using his work sometimes to teach themselves to read, and the works of Lenin. But he was able to distill these incredibly complex ideas into language that peasants could understand, and at the same time make theoretical contributions, expand upon the ideas of someone like Marx, who was such an incredibly deep thinker, whose philosophy and philosophical system is so complex. Mao was able to expand upon that while also making it easy to understand. Truly incredible stuff. MLK, for Americans, he should almost be up here at the top, but I'll just go very good because he wasn't, a Marxist or a Marxist-Leninist, but ended apartheid in America, at least de facto apartheid, or de jure apartheid, I should say. He moved America forward. The Civil Rights Revolution was the third revolution in American history. We have the anti-colonial revolution against the British. We have the Civil War, which ends slavery and brings us into the capitalist era. And then we have the Civil Rights Revolution, which ends apartheid and places black and white workers on a more equal playing field, at least an equal legal playing field, where they can join the same unions and organize together politically, which creates the conditions for the possibility of socialism. There could be no socialism prior to the civil rights movement because the workers were divided. And you could see that within all the unions. You had all these all-white unions, which were much weaker because they didn't have black workers in. And then that allowed, the company to go to black people and get them to scab and whatnot. So it created all these divisions within the workers. Civil rights revolution puts all workers of all backgrounds on an equal playing field, moves America forward in a revolutionary moment, and can't have socialism in the U.S. without Martin Luther King. Period, exclamation point. Gaddafi was based. He makes all these criticisms. The Green Book is awesome, but Gaddafi makes all these criticisms of Lenin. He doesn't say it explicitly, but he spends all this time talking about authoritarianism and how Libya's system is going to be anti-authoritarian and have, all these different forms of popular democracy and or as few decisions as possible made by centralized authorities, which is cool. But then he ends up getting overthrown by NATO, right? And it's like, well, maybe you should have done a little authoritarianism. Maybe you should have been a little more authoritarian and a little less critical of Lenin and focused a little more on combating U.S. imperialism. Still created one of the most prosperous societies in all of Africa. Honestly, he should be up here because he did successfully create a Libyan socialist society. Actually, we're going to go very good with Gaddafi because he was overthrown. The revolution was eventually overthrown, but they were very prosperous for a very long time. Introduced unique ideas, or not unique ideas, but because other African thinkers like Lumumba had proposed this, but introduced ideas like African central banks for development, which was one of the major reasons that the United States unalived him. So good leader, should have just done more to protect himself and the revolution. Maduro, based bus driver man, basically just continuing the work of Hugo Chavez, but we'll put him up there. We'll put him in front of Gaddafi because Venezuela is still socialist, and here, yeah, and Libya is unfortunately a country in total chaos with basically no central government. Right. Andropov, don't know that much about him. Parenti, everybody knows how I feel about Parenti. He's going up here. That might not make sense, right? He's a writer and a historian. How do you put him above, all these people who how do you put him above Xi Jinping? How is Michael Parenti? Actually, Xi Jinping needs to go up here. I'm changing that, but how do you put Michael Parenti all the way up there? It's because I'm biased. It's because he signed a book for me and gave it to me, and he's my hero, and he's the one who helped introduce me to socialism, so I don't care if he doesn't belong up here. He's going up here, and you're all just going to have to deal with that. Kim Jong-il, same explanation as Maduro. Who the hell is this guy? Like, actually, who the hell is this? Let's try and figure this out. We're going to search this on Google. Who is that? He looks like a modern guy. I can't even get any answers. Who is that? Oh, snap. You got a book signed by Parenti? I don't normally give a F about signatures, but I'm jealous of it. Yeah, same. I usually don't care either, but it's my copy of Black Shirts and Reds. I'll just grab it since it's right here. That is why Michael Parenti goes on the based list or whatever, wherever I put him, the based here with Xi Jinping. Yeah, pretty based. Who is this guy? Does anyone know who this guy is? I don't think anybody in the chat knows. All right, Kim Jong-un, same explanation as Maduro and Kim Jong-il. We'll put Kim Jong-un above Kim Jong-il, I guess. Chavez, Chavismo. He's going based. Chavismo is something that we should learn from in the U.S. The Venezuelan Socialist Project, Bolivarian socialism, is very unique. There's some weird stuff in it, like some Trotskyism and some weirdness. But either way, still a socialist society right under the nose of the U.S. Chavez was a member of the military. The way that Venezuela has established socialism has been unique to any other country. Tried to lead a revolution in 92, failed. And then in 98, he wins election. So it's a democratic form of socialism, but they also undertake these like revolutionary transformations, like the creation of new government bodies aimed at providing popular democracy. And also there are all these communes in Venezuela, this giant commune system. And under Chavez, the government started funding them and promoting them with the idea that, these will be the building blocks of socialism, because it's here where you already have this communal spirit and this communal culture and, almost a communal mode of production within the commune. So it's not just that he won election and was the president, right? There was a sort of transformation, a qualitative transformation of the system. Not like a Marxist-Leninist revolution, but it's gotten him lumped in with like Cuba, right? When cowards like Gabriel Boric, the liberal pseudo-socialist president of Chile, he'll be like, I'm a socialist, but not a socialist like those Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans, right? In Latin America, the Cubans, the Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans are considered like those are too far socialist. You could be a democratic socialist, but you don't want to be like them. So that shows you how based Chavez was, that he gets lumped in with like Che and Fidel. But yeah, Chavismo is basically populism. He got constantly derided as this dumb hick. He couldn't possibly be as educated as the intellectual. He was just a dumb working class guy. They do the same to Maduro as a bus driver. They're based as hell. Reminds me a lot of how the ruling class looks down on the middle American working class here, the agricultural working class here. Stalin. Boom. Same thing I said about these guys. He ran the first socialist country, defeated the Nazis, simplified theory. People say Stalin wasn't a theorist, but he was he built socialism, right? Like I said, read the Communist Party of China. Everything that they're doing, they're comparing it and contrasting it to the Soviet Union and trying to learn from the Soviet Union. Right? That's theory that Stalin was producing. Theory is produced through practice. Theory is the analysis of practice. So by engaging in the practice of building socialism, the first socialist experiment, and recording his thoughts on that and his analysis of that, Stalin was also producing theory, which would then be drawn upon by future communists. Stalin did write theory, not just simplifying theory, but unique theory on how to develop a socialist society and really the idea of socialism in one country. Is established there. Who the hell is this guy? Ascalon? Anyone know who this is? Akalon? I have no clue. Assad. from a socialist perspective, not the most based, but from an anti-imperialist and sovereignty perspective and being a thorn in the side of the U.S. empire, definitely based. Him and Gaddafi were attacked by NATO at the same time. Syria was successful in defending themselves while Libya was not, but they probably would have collapsed if it weren't for Russian intervention. So we'll put them up here with these guys. Do I need to say anything about that one? Poop. Literal poop brain. Literal anti-communist. Literally shouldn't be on this list. Literally should be on a list next to John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and other imperialist neocons. Except what's so dang infuriating about Trotsky is he's considered a communist. And there are all these communists who call themselves Trotskyists. And there are all these neocons who call themselves Trotskyists as well, or at least who used to. And really the origin of all anti-communism, the origin of all wrecking and left anti-communism and claiming to be a communist while actually supporting capitalist imperialism. Trotsky's like the shining example of that. He's wrecking and being an imperialist, fake communist in a crystallized human form. Who do we got now? Honecker. I don't know too much about him. Che Guevara. Che's going up here for me, along with the best. The reason I put Che alongside these guys, again, he did write theory. He wrote an analysis of why the he actually predicted the Soviet Union would dissolve. I don't necessarily agree with his analysis as to why, but he sided with China and the Sino-Soviet split. He was a hardcore Maoist, almost a bit of an ultra. But the reason I put Che up here, even though he maybe wasn't Fidel was the leader of the country while Che was running the industry. So he was the economic leader of his country, but not the top face, the top dog. But the reason I put him up there is because of what Che can tell us about how to live our lives, what he can tell us about virtue and how to be a good man. And he put this into theory. He had this idea that socialism would create a new man in Cuba, this new kind of person who was more focused on the community than on consumerism and money and material things. And he strove to be the example of that man every day. That's why Fidel called him a man from the future. He wanted to exemplify that new socialist man, and he knew he could gain people's support and trust and respect by acting in an upstanding and honorable way and being the kind of human being that others admired. So he was incredibly disciplined. He was overly adventuristic in the revolution, always wanting to go to the front lines and having to be pulled back by Fidel. He was setting up schools during the revolution, literally building schools in the Escambray Mountains during a guerrilla war and teaching people Marxist theory in mass. So this guy understood what it meant to be a Marxist and to live out or to live your life as a communist. So Che is based as hell. Che above Deng and G. Yeah, I know it doesn't make any sense, but fuck you. This is my list. I had Parenti above G too. I don't give a shit if it makes sense. Tier lists don't make sense anyways. Tier lists are retarded. Who's this? Zapata? Zapata was based. He was technically an anarchist, but what people don't recognize is like that was before the Soviet Union, right? That was before the Bolsheviks. So that was when it was a little more acceptable to be an anarchist. That was before Marxism had been proved in theory. And the Zapatistas loved the Bolsheviks. They're like, this is badass. They're building a workers' state. They had a successful revolution. What can we learn from them? Like they were basically Marxist-Leninists for a while because they were just trying to learn everything that they could from the Soviet Union. So we'll go good. He's better. The Zapatistas are cooler than being all right, even though they're anarchists. Malatesta, who's that guy? Italian anarchist propagandist. Why are all these anarchists in here? Why am I supposed to keep up with what all these anarchists are writing? It's all nonsense. Who did I think this was at first? Who's that guy? Machno. I thought this was Nestor Makhno for a second. I'm like, what the hell? He was like this Ukrainian so-called anarchist who was like basically just running around with a band of criminals and trying to run their own society within the USSR, and talking about how the Soviets were oppressive, and how their anarchist society was truly free, even though people were starving and being sexually assaulted and stuff. And the Soviet Union just went in and took them out eventually when they got around to it. Fidel! I think we'll put Fidel up here with these guys. We'll put Fidel in very good, because Fidel wasn't like a theorist. Fidel was, didn't even call himself a communist for a while. He was very pragmatic, was getting annoyed with Che sometimes because he thought Che was a bit of an ultra and wanted to be more practical, and called himself a Cuban nationalist instead of a communist so he wouldn't piss anyone off and could be the forward-facing face of the revolution, before eventually declaring that it was a socialist and anti-imperialist revolution. No Cuban revolution without Fidel. I'm going to move him up. I don't know why I put him down there. He deserves to be up there with Chavez. That was stupid of me to put him down there. Fidel was based as hell. U.S. tried to assassinate him over 500 times. He lived, prevented the revolution from being overthrown, tried to help Allende and prevent the Chilean revolution from being overthrown. Didn't work, but yeah. Viva Fidel. Orwell. We got another literal poop brain in the house. Orwell was like maybe some kind of spawn of Trotsky. Like, I think Trotsky, one day he was in the bathroom for a while and was doing something on the toilet, and then one day Orwell climbed out of the toilet, this creation that spawned from Trotsky. Either a turd or something else came out of Trotsky, and he was like, you know what? I love that Trotsky guy. I'm going to do what he did. I'm going to call myself a socialist while doing everything I can to make myself a cuck of British imperialism and of U.S. imperialism and capitalism. And then everybody will quote my works like Animal Farm and say, Orwell said communism was bad and he was a socialist. He was a communist. No, he wasn't. You're not a socialist or a communist if you shit on every existing communist experiment, especially when those communists had just defeated the Nazis or were in the process of fighting the Nazis. So I believe Animal Farm and then 1984 were published in like 1944, 1945, and then 1949. So right after the Soviets defeated Hitler, he's like, yeah, screw them. Which is, what Trotsky was doing when the Soviets were fighting Hitler or preparing to fight Hitler. So it's like they ice-picked Trotsky, and the British State Department was like, shit, we need another one. We need another Trotsky. Well, we got this Orwell guy. Let's start paying him. I don't know if he was paid by the British State Department. Probably was. Castro's hydrogen. What the hell? All right, who do we got here? Walter Ulbricht, another German communist. He was I believe, the leader of the Communist Party in the Weimar Republic before Thalmann, but I don't know that much about him, so we'll skip him. Gorb, poop brain, another poop brain. Sold out his country to the West, had like a sub 13% approval rating by the time he left office because he allowed the Soviet economy to be pillaged by Western multinationals, which what was called perestroika. A traitor to socialism, someone who betrayed global socialism in favor of capitalism, and in doing so, not only devastated his own country, but devastated all of the socialist republics where malnutrition and homelessness and sex trafficking and drug addiction and all sorts of negative social metrics increased across the board in the former socialist countries as their economies were pillaged by Western corporations. But also, that removed the umbrella of protection that the Soviet Union provided for so many countries. So in the 90s, when George Bush Sr. started bombing Iraq and bombed them to a pre-industrial, post-apocalyptic state, according to the New York Times, in 1990, Saddam Hussein was wondering, how is this happening? Why isn't the Soviet Union protecting me? Right? Because the Soviets had stopped the U.S. from decimating Iraq. They had said, no, you can't do that. And they were in the UN Security Council and they could veto the US. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that went away, and the U.S. had near total freedom to run roughshod over the globe. And we see all these coups throughout the 90s in Latin America and the launching of the so-called War on Terror. Or maybe they didn't use that term till the 2000s, but really it begins in the 90s with the Gulf War and the bombing of Iraq, the aforementioned bombing of Iraq. So, yeah. Horrible person. Another one of these self-described socialists who did more than anyone to help capitalism. Layla Khaled. It's hard to rank a Palestinian leader. Like, it's hard to rank Ghassan Kanafani, the Palestinian leader for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, because it's such a unique situation, right? With Palestine being colonized by the Zionist entity, this arm of Western imperialism, like, you almost can't judge them like a normal Marxist-Leninist because they're in that situation, because they are being ethnically cleansed by capitalist imperialism. So that almost makes me want to put her in the based category. I'll just put her at the front of the very good category, though. Who's this? Ludo Martins. Is this the guy who wrote Open the Veins of Latin America? Why is he on? He's Belgian. Oh, no. He wrote that book on Stalin. That's right. He wrote that book on Stalin. I guess he was also the last foreigner to meet Kim Il-sung before his death. Interesting. Sounds based as hell. Yeah, I was thinking of Open the Veins of Latin America for some reason, which is another book. He wrote a big book on Stalin that's very famous. That was Eduardo Galeano who wrote Open the Veins of Latin America. I don't know what I was thinking about. I don't know much about him. I'll skip him. Maurice Bishop. People probably don't know Maurice Bishop, but he was the leader of the New Jewel movement in Grenada. I believe Grenada, when did the U.S. I believe that was one of those invasions that the U.S. did after the fall of the Soviet Union because they now could with impunity. And that might have been the first one that they did. I'm trying to look up the date on it. When did the U.S. topple Maurice Bishop? Oh, no, it was before that. It was in the 80s. It was 1983. Never mind. But he was part of the New Jewel movement in Grenada. I don't know too much about it other than that they were Marxist-Leninists and that the U.S. deposed them in a very quick invasion under Reagan. So we'll put him in all right. Because I don't know. I know he was a Marxist-Leninist who was deposed. Zizek. I think Zizek's actually poop brain, but we'll put him in actually cringe. Because I know he's written stuff that's true and he's written stuff that's correct, but supported imperialism at every turn, doesn't support existing socialism, mostly just as cultural analysis. Gabriel Rockhill has showed how he's capitalism's court jester. In practice, he grew up in a socialist country, I can't remember which one, and was in one of the reactionary political parties that was trying to overthrow socialism. I've never liked him because I can't stand his voice. It drives me crazy and makes me cringe when he like this, which is, I guess, mean and not a good reason to dislike somebody's work. But that's why I disliked his work for years. So when I actually looked into it and found that he was an imperialist who calls himself a Marxist while not supporting existing socialism, I was like, okay, good. I don't have to start caring about that guy. Ceausescu, not very good. He was the leader of Romania, I believe, and it's often cited as an example of what not to do under socialism. Romania got much worse after the collapse of communism and the neoliberal shock therapy that they were induced with. But yeah, better than Kropotkin. But Noam Chomsky, he's going to go next to Kropotkin and bad as one of those anarchists who can provide good analysis, but basically psyop the whole country or psyop the whole generation of American leftists into not supporting existing socialism. And Vijay Prashad's been having a good influence on him. His last book, The Withdrawal, I recommend. It's a good book. I did a review of it. I had some harsh criticisms of the book, but it is a good analysis, and it's an analysis that seems to be very pro-China, which is a positive development for Chomsky, who claimed that the USSR was actually right-wing, and that Leninism is right-wing, and has no understanding of dialectics, and lost a debate about dialectics to Foucault, which is just embarrassing. But smart guy still. Oscar Wilde. Why is he in here? That's interesting. I'm going to skip him. Is that Paul Cockshot? The GOAT, my king. Paul Cockshot on here with the big boys. Wow. Cockshot's work, his political economy work must be getting around, or must be getting popular, I guess, if he's mentioned here with the likes of Xi Jinping. For me, Cockshot's way up there. He's been really influential on me. I think his work on political economy is good. Put him up there and good. Pol Pot. Clearly. Just kidding. Yeah. Proudhon. I could put him in not very good or bad, because a lot of the stuff he said was really, really stupid, but he was pre-Marx, right? So he didn't have the benefit of being able to learn from Marx. Him and Marx knew each other in real life, and Proudhon was much older than him. Marx knew him when he was young. So Proudhon was arrogant towards Marx. The people following Proudhon around called him the master, which he didn't like, but it still, when that's the kind of person you are and that's the kind of people you're surrounded with, it boosts your ego. But Proudhon was influential for Marx, right? Proudhon was this utopian socialist in France who was saying property is theft. And Marx was saying that doesn't make any sense. That's a nonsensical saying, but I like what you're saying here about socialism and the workers rising up. And he was very popular too. He had a lot of people behind him. But then when he wrote the Philosophy of Poverty, when he was older and not as politically active, he wrote that, and Marx and Engels were young and extremely politically active, and they were trying to push people towards their ideas and away from Proudhon's ideas, which were outdated. So Marx responded to the Philosophy of Poverty by writing The Poverty of Philosophy. And at that point, because Proudhon is arrogant and has too big of an ego, he disavows Marx, and they're not friends anymore. But he was still, Lenin says in 3 Sources and 3 Components of Marxism, which is a fantastic pamphlet, he says Marxism is a combination of 3 things: English political economy, German philosophy, and French utopian socialism. That French utopian socialism in many ways comes from Proudhon, or he was at least the highest form of it. So we'll put him in math, just so we can have someone in the math. I might put him in not very good if if we already had someone in math, but whatever. Samora Machel is a Mozambique communist who died in a plane crash. Very sketchy. Anytime, a communist or somebody going against the CIA's wishes dies in a plane crash, so it's like, what happened there? We'll put him right next to Maurice Bishop, because they were both leaders of small countries in the global south that got murdered or toppled for their beliefs. Sankara. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of leftists on Twitter who are super annoying and super obsessed with identity politics and cancel culture, and they have Thomas Sankara as their profile picture, so that's given Sankara a bad name, but he was based as hell. Marxist-Leninist in Burkina Faso. One of the things you hear about communists always is that, they're corrupt. Communism always leads to corruption. Well, Sankara was the opposite of corrupt. He sold off all the government luxuries, like a government mansion that he was supposed to stay in. The government had all these Mercedes, these really nice sports cars. He sold them all off because he didn't want them to be corrupt. And he said every government official in Burkina Faso has to wear clothing that is made in Burkina Faso by the people for the people, which I think the American Communist Party should adopt that too. Wear clothing that's made here in the United States. And for a country like Burkina Faso that had been colonized and imperialized, it was very important for them to be to wear their own stuff and produce their own clothing. And before, Sankara didn't change the name, but before it was called Burkina Faso, when it was under the control of the French colonialists, it was called Upper Volta. And what Burkina Faso means is the land of upright men. So Sankara represented this idea of we're going to be independent and sovereign, and we're going to produce our own shit. We're not going to wear, clothes from the West. We're going to wear clothes that we made here in Burkina Faso, and we're going to be upright and self-sufficient. But unfortunately, he wasn't wary enough. Another one of these situations where a communist leader was too nice, where they weren't authoritarian enough. And he had been warned by various people that there were sections within his bodyguard that were siding with the CIA and Belgium and the Western imperialist powers, and that they were going to kill him. He didn't listen, and he ended up being killed by a man who had formerly been one of his best friends, Blaise Compaoré. And they cut him up into little pieces and buried him in various places around Burkina Faso so that his body couldn't be found. And that Compaoré guy served as the president until like 2019 or 2020. He was just recently ousted by the people of Burkina Faso in an anti-colonial coup, like a bottom-up sort of revolutionary coup against this Western puppet government, which is based. But so it's good to see Burkina Faso moving in that direction again. But Sankara was awesome. He launched these tree planting campaigns, launched all these positive economic policies before he was killed. But he was killed, and we'll put him with all our other nice socialist leaders here who got murdered. Some of them are here. Some of them are here. All the ones up here, you'll notice, are socialist leaders who managed to live. They managed to stay alive and stay in power. These are the best of the best, the cream of the crop. These are those who were based as hell, but maybe not as advanced in their theory as they should have been, or maybe they got overthrown. Same here. Or maybe people who didn't take power. Got our Latin, or our small, or leaders of small countries in the global south. Proudhon. This is where we start to get to the anarchists. Ceausescu's our last socialist here. Well, I guess other than Pol Pot. And then we got all these anarchists and fake socialists. Pseudo-Marxists. So that's my tier list. Hope it was good. Let me know how yours would be different or where you think I messed up. Hopefully that was a fun activity. Gosh, I haven't checked the chat in forever. Would have been nice if he had just taken better precautions. I know. Michael Hudson and Jeffrey Sachs and some other economists endorse and give consultation to Jill Stein. Oh, that's cool. I did a video. Obviously, I'm in the ACP and Jill Stein is in the Green Party, but I did a video defending her recently because some Democrat, some liberal on TikTok who's probably paid off by a super PAC, because a lot of them are, was saying that she's a Russian asset in the most condescending way. He's like, baby, honey, hun, dumbass, person who's not as smart as me, the enlightened lib. Jill Stein's literally a Russian asset, hun. Like, I'm okay, like, whatever, think what you want to think, but as soon as you start being that condescending, it's like, come on now. Don't be wrong and condescending. I'm printing off my socialist tier list so I can tweet it later. Enver Hoxha is best. I've actually heard Hoxha is pretty based. All I know is the memes, though, of him calling everyone a revisionist. Honecker is very good. What country was he the leader of? I can't remember right now. Was it? It was East Germany, right? Erich Honecker, former chairman of State Council of East Germany. Yeah. Oh, fuck, I nailed it. Yeah, he was good. I should have put him on. He should have probably been in good, or very good, because East Germany was extremely based. And all we learn about them is the Stasi, but they were better in many ways to West Germany, even though we are told the opposite here in the U.S., and that it was all disaster and authoritarianism on the other side of the Berlin Wall. They're still using the Russian asset thing. Oh, of course. They haven't dropped the Russian asset thing. That's going to go on forever, I think. That's all they know how to talk about lately is Russia. Everyone say Russia, Russia, Russia. Petrodollar is the fossil fuel war imperialism economy dollar. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Hawkshot into house. Yeah, up there with the greatest of the greats. Chomsky has some wild takes. Dude, if you listen to, like, I'll read a book like The Withdrawal, and I'll be like, okay, I disagree with Chomsky in some specific areas, but he's not that bad, right? He's opening up so many people's eyes to U.S. imperialism, and he's allowed to do it, right? He's a prominent, famous academic who hasn't been jailed or whatever for saying these things. But then you hear him talk about Leninism and you hear him talk about the Soviet Union. It's like, oh, well, now I understand why Chomsky's not suppressed. Of course he's not suppressed. When he says this stuff, he sounds like John Bolton. He sounds like a stereotypical neoconservative. And then I'll be like, I hate Chomsky. And then I'll hear some analysis he gives that's really good, talking about how the best time in Afghanistan's history was when the Marxist government was in power and when the Soviet Union was there. I'm like, dang, tanky Chomsky moment, based. And then he'll turn around and be like, yeah, but I don't know. Stalin ate people's babies, and therefore we can't do or learn anything from the Soviet Union. And we all need to be anarchists and just complain all the time. Best of luck to Noam Chomsky, though. He's battling a health issue now. I mean, he's battling old age. He's extremely old and probably not long for this world. So best to his family and him. Another view of Stalin. Yeah, it's the Ludo Martins book. It's weird ranking like leaders with like authors. Like, Parenti's work is so vital, but how do you rank him with the Xi Jinping or whatever? But at the same time, a lot of these people are authors and leaders and activists, or actors and leaders of countries where the workers have state power, as well as leaders of revolutionary struggles. Like, that's the thing about these people who are in the best category, like these folks like Lenin, Mao, Stalin, Che. Not only did they help to lead the revolution, not only did they help to overthrow the ruling class, but they successfully helped to build socialism afterwards. They successfully stabilized the revolution and made life substantially better for their people. And on top of that, they were writing books that were contributions to Marxist theory. So it's like they were theorists, they were like military leaders, and they were political and economic leaders. It's just out of control with some of these folks like Mao. I don't mean to sound like, this dogmatic hero worshiping communist, but sometimes, like, read John Lee Anderson's biography about Che. You're going to be like, holy shit, this man's like a demigod. Like, how do this is like the most admirable person I've ever read about in my life. Not just in terms of his politics, but in how he went about his activities day to day. Trotsky L, yes. This list's going to trigger a lot of people. Oh, yeah. Everyone who sees that list without hearing my explanations and hearing me say, I don't give a shit that the list is objectively wrong. It's my list. It's subjective. I'm a postmodernist now. Anyone who just sees the list will be mad at it, I feel like. I mean, what are some of the more ridiculous ones here? We got Parenti next to Xi Jinping and Deng and Ho Chi Minh. We have Paul Cockshot next to Brezhnev and Ernst Thälmann and Zapata and Allende. We have Ceausescu underneath of Proudhon. Some people would be mad about the fact that I have Zizek, Orwell, and Trotsky so far down. I have Tito up next to some of the big ones. I have MLK next to Gaddafi, Sankara, Assad. Yeah, a lot of people would be mad at that. I haven't read much Che, but I'll get to it. Yeah, it's good to read Che, and it's also good to read about Che. Like, I would read John Lee Anderson's documentary about Che, because like I said, his writings were good, but also reading about his life is really inspiring. And really helps guide how I live my own life. Chavismo. Any criticisms of Mao's last years? Yeah, of course. Of course. 70-30, 70% good, 30 bad. Deng was needed. It was time for the Deng era. It was time for reform and opening up. The Mao era was great. It created the conditions for the possibility of the Deng era and the explosion of the Chinese economy that happened in the 70s. That would have been impossible without Mao, because before Mao, China was agrarian. They didn't even have industry. Their people didn't even know how to work with steel. They only knew how to tend to their fields. After Mao, they had this big industrial base, and Deng was able to take that and blow it up into the country with the highest manufacturing output and fastest growing economy in the world today. That's lifted 800 million people out of extreme poverty. Noam Chomsky was a CIA asset. I don't know if he was an asset, but certain things that he said, I guarantee, are boosted by the CIA. Like if you search Chomsky, one of the first things that comes up is him calling Leninism right wing. It's got over 1 million views, right? I'm sure the CIA wouldn't. I don't know if they have, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind boosting a video like that, getting a video like that to show up on people's page. Stalin did eat a lot of babies. Well, that's a great point, Commie Trucker. He was on that Gonzalo grind. Like, if you were petty bourgeois or if you didn't follow the line of the party, your babies were getting boiled. Right? Everything that we hear about Stalin in the West is true. Just kidding, of course. Not kidding about Gonzalo. That guy was actually a psycho. I read Anderson's book, Che is My Hero, absolutely. And the best thing about that book is Anderson is not biased, right? He did a great job. It's a 700 plus page book, and he did years of research in Cuba, went to Cuba, dug through the archives, spoke to people who knew Che, interviewed all of his, descendants or surviving family, or I don't know if he has any surviving family. He doesn't have any surviving family anymore. John Lee Anderson wrote that a while back. I think he did talk to Che's kids and stuff. And, he does his best to criticize Che, but Che made it hard. Che did so much. And even the part where John Lee Anderson talks about Che executing people, like he's a liberal, right? He's not in favor of executing people or whatever. You'd think he would make Che look terrible, but he's like, the revolution had traitors, right? People who tried to sell out the revolution to the Batista regime. And in the early days of the guerrilla war, they couldn't just keep prisoners and keep them fed and keep dragging them along because they didn't have the resources for it. So executions had to be made. And what Che said was, if I'm going to ask my men to do an execution, right, if executions are necessary and we have to do it, then I have to be willing to do it myself, because otherwise, how can I ask my men to do it? If I can't do it myself, how can I ask my troops to do it? So he performed the first execution of the revolution, which was a necessity, not something he wanted to do. And the story that we're told, a Cuban Gusano that I knew in college told me once that, Che did that because he just liked killing. He would always want to be the one who did the executions. He would just shoot people in the head for fun. It's like, no, he absolutely didn't want to do the executions, but he said, if the revolution needs to make executions, then I need to be willing to do it. Otherwise, I'm a hypocrite, and my soldiers can't trust me. The people can't trust me. So, base Che. And Che made sure all the trials were fair, right? He was that, and that was just like his personality, right? He wasn't going to just shoot someone. It was going to be, we're going to go around and around. Like the first execution they did, it was a long debate. It was like basically them debating and trying to not find any other possibility besides execution. Like, we can do this, we can leave them here, we can give them some food and make them go that way. And then, they'd be like, but what if they join up with Batista? What if they reveal our location? Right? If we let them go, they're going to reveal our location and Batista is going to come here and kill us, and we don't have enough people to fight them off yet. Whereas in China, the policy eventually did become just let them go. Every prisoner of war we let them go because they had enough military force at a certain point where it didn't matter. But for the early days of the Cuban Revolution, if the Batista regime found their location, I mean, hypothetically, they could have just called in a U.S. airstrike, too. Remember, this is the CIA-backed, U.S.-backed regime that wouldn't have been in power without being propped up by the imperialist West. So they could have just called in a quick bombing campaign, and the revolution would have been done for. So eventually they realized, we're going to have to do this execution. So Che said, I'll do it. Crazy. Have you seen the movie Che, starring Benicio del Toro? I have not. I've seen Motorcycle Diaries. My dad is a Spanish teacher, and he shows it for his class. Che Part 1. Is there a Part 2? That looks badass, as long as it's not a propaganda film. Thank you so much, Stu, for the $2. Maybe I will check out that film and then do a Marxist movie review. I have a buddy who does a Marxist movie review podcast, so sometimes I'll just do the reviews myself, but usually if I have a review that I want to do, I'll go on his podcast, so I could hit him up, see if he wanted to watch Che and respond to it, and see where it's accurate and where it's inaccurate. So I'm kind of a Che scholar, honestly. Thank you, though, Stu. Thank you so much. Slava, my Politburo deputy, proud ACP leadership member. Thank you so much, Slava, for the $5 super sticker. Definitely not necessary. You do enough for the ACP and for the Institute, and for me, just with all the work that you do and with helping us to coordinate housing and places to stay when we're doing conferences and stuff. But thank you so much for the $5 super sticker, Slava. Really appreciate that. Hope you and the fam are doing well. Highly recommend it. All right, cool. The executed people had blood on their hands, former secret police and such. Yeah, right. These were people fighting for blood money. They were fighting for the Batista regime, which was this CIA propped up, completely undemocratic gangster dictatorship. That was, hiring mercenaries. The patriotic Cubans, the people who cared about their country, and who wanted not just socialism, but independence from U.S. imperialism. Those people joined the revolution. The people who were sellouts, the people who were reactionaries, the people who would side with imperialism for a paycheck, those were the ones who fought for Batista. And those were the people who ended up being executed. So it's not like they were innocent or anything. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find if there are any more good comments on the tier list segment. Someone says Assad, LOL. Yeah, Assad's technically a socialist. He's a Ba'athist socialist, which is like Islamic socialism. And, Saddam Hussein was too. He was a murderous bastard who was backed by the CIA. So, you can be a socialist in name only. But that is why the U.S. wants to destroy Syria, because they have a socialist-leaning economy.